Jesus Christ.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father,
"Father, give me the share of the wealth that will belong to me."
So he divided his assets between them. And a few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant region. And there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that region, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said,
"How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'"
So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him,
"Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son."
But the father said to his slaves,
Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.
And they began to celebrate. Now, his elder son was in the field. And as he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied,
"Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he's got him back safe and sound."
Then the older brother became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father,
"Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I may celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him."
Then the father said to him,
Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.
This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. So I'm curious, who has heard this gospel reading before? By show of hands. It's okay. Well, there's going to be a lot of this interaction today. So there's a good amount of people who've heard it before. Now, I'm curious, who has heard it by the title, The Prodigal Son? Okay, most of us, right? And if you've received the worship live stream text messages, you actually had it text to you just about 5 minutes ago. So the reality is that many people know this story from that perspective. But that is actually, if you were listening carefully, not mentioned at all in the actual text. The title, The Prodigal Son, actually comes from the section heading in the Bible. And the important thing to know about those section headings that kind of break up the different parts of the text, those aren't in the original Greek text. Those are added by the editors. And so depending on how the editor sees a certain part of that, they might title it a little bit differently. And so it's really important for us to remember that those can be helpful, but that they shouldn't really pigeonhole us in how we're going to interpret and relate to that text. So, as we look at today's parable, we should remember that a parable is meant to be a story that disarms us, that opens us up to the reality of our world, and a story that challenges us to see God's reign in a new way. So as we look at the story, let's not let the prodigal son get in the way of extracting some understanding of how we can best see our God. But let's start with that younger son. Let's talk about that younger son, right? After all, here he was, younger son, unabashedly asked for his inheritance from his father. Essentially, what he's saying is that he wished his father was dead. This would be a request during that time of the story is being told that would have essentially ended the relationship between the father and the younger son. And it's important for us to remember that inheritance is not just like stocks and money transfers and all of that kind of stuff, but rather, this was likely livestock, and probably most likely, primarily made up of land. And this land that the father had was likely passed down generationally from those who had gone before him, and the father probably wanted to pass that along to his sons to give them a good and rooted opportunity. And so what did that young son do? Well, he very quickly liquidates this land, likely selling it to a Gentile outsider. And this was not only scandalous, but it was also disruptive to that Jewish community. And so after this liquidation, the young son left town, foolishly spent the money on a playboy lifestyle, and this is where we get the phrase prodigal son or wasteful son. Now, had that younger son sold it, liquidated it, gone and lived this lifestyle, and had a severe famine not hit, well, this story might turn out completely different. But what happens is that through these change of events, the young man's extravagant excess turned into extreme want. But the problem had become that the son cut himself off from his family, and his real security, that of having connections, having community, having kind of a social safety net of sorts, well, that was gone because he had shunned and left it. And not only did he choose to cut off, but also the community and the family would be required to disown him because of this act of squandering his money among the Gentiles. And so it is in the midst of this severed relationships and the fear that this young son could not go back, that this young Jewish man took on an unclean and cursed role, living among the pigs. Now, when you hit rock bottom like this young Jewish man, sometimes you're lucky. Sometimes you're lucky and you find a way out. Oftentimes, you don't. But it so happens that this Jewish man remembered how his father's hired hands were treated so well in comparison to his plot in life. So he decided to ask his father to be a hired hand so that he would not go hungry and die. And to do this, he planned his confession so that he might tell his father that I have sinned against heaven and against you. Now, this statement isn't something new. Does anybody remember where we might have heard this statement before? I have sinned against heaven and against you. Anybody remember? It's okay, I didn't remember either. That's why I get to look at the book and stuff like that, and figure this out. Well, this statement, it actually harkens back to the Hebrew Scriptures. You remember this guy named Pharaoh? Who's heard of Pharaoh before? It's the guy Moses, right? Pharaoh, plagues, Charlton Heston, right? All these things, right? Okay, so back then, all these plagues, they're coming down on the Pharaoh, and to get these nasty plagues to stop, Pharaoh says the exact same thing. I have sinned against heaven and against your God. And in that story, we know that Pharaoh wasn't actually repentant, right? He just wanted to get the suffering to stop and would do anything that he wanted. He would say anything to make sure that that happened. So the reality is, it's kind of hard to tell. Is this young son actually sincere? Or is he kind of scheming in today's story? And so I'm wondering, I'm going to take a quick poll. 3 options. Is he sincere? Is he scheming? Or is he something else? And something else means anything else that you want. So you've got one of 3 options. Sincere. Or is he scheming, or is it something else? So sincere. Who thinks he was sincere? Okay. And who thinks he was scheming? Oh, less people. Okay. And who thinks something else? All right. I would say the voter turnout in here is worse than on our national level. And that is a problem, okay? Because you literally have 3 options, and it's right in front of you. So, was the younger son sincere in his apology? Was he scheming? Or was it something else? Let's try it one more time. Who thinks he was sincere in his apology? Okay. Who thinks he was scheming? He was just trying to get what he wanted to fill his hungry belly. And who thinks something else? Okay. What else do you think it was? I'm curious. Desperation. Fear. Anyone else want to admit, or were you just like, well, I gotta vote something. So this is the catch-all. I'm gonna do that one. Okay, so could be fear, right? He could be scheming because he was hungry, he was desperate, right? He needed to get this more food. And I kind of think, I want to think of him as sincere. I kind of want to see him as really repenting, but maybe really on the other side, maybe he just realized that his father is a complete sucker, right? I mean, after all, his father already gave him his inheritance, and he already took on all this shame from the community. To give someone their inheritance before you died, bad, shameful, should not do, right? And so the Reverend Dr. David Lose says, and this is what he says, maybe I want to think of the younger son as sincere, because I like to think that I am sincere. I want to believe that I always learn from my mistakes and that when I apologize, I really mean it. But if you're anything like me, I know that that's not always the case. Sometimes I am sincere, and sometimes I'm just sorry that I got caught. So perhaps looking at this parable from the viewpoint of the younger son, what it can do is it can allow us to pause and say, how sincere are we as we engage in the world around us? For example, we might talk about the need to address climate change, but do our actions actually show that we are ordering a lot of takeout with all of the waste that comes from that? Or we drive a car even if we are the only one inside? Or that we take plane rides to far off places to have a change of scenery and some fun? Or do we sometimes verbalize our support for mental health services or the queer community or refugees or free speech, but then we don't actually show that with our advocacy or our financial support or our vote? You see, we, like that young son, may virtue signal with all the right words, and our Facebook page is full of it, but do we sincerely embody it? Something that that younger son leaves us to ponder today. But then what about that prodigal father? And yes, I said prodigal father, or that wasteful father. I mean, for me, I think that the father was probably the most wasteful of all of the people in today's parable. After all, the father saw his young son at a distance, and he did what no upstanding man would do during that time. He quickly ran to meet his son, and in that act, he sent a signal to the community that his son was not to be cast out. Not to be cast out as the cultural norms would have dictated, but rather the father's act was showing that this young man was to be reconciled to the community as he was reconciled to his father. And then that sucker of a father gave him a fine robe and a ring of authority that very well might be sold yet again at the son's whim. And he invited the whole town to celebrate with him, not knowing how that son might respond. You see, that scene right there, everything else is building up to that moment when the father is running out to that son. It gives us the essence of today's parable. Remember, today's parable started because the religious authorities were grumbling. And why were they grumbling? Because Jesus was eating with and welcoming sinners, right? That is why these religious authorities are grumbling. And so all of the parables that follow, there are 3 of them, are all in light of what is going on with these religious authorities grumbling because Jesus was welcoming sinners and eating with them. And so we actually skipped over the first 2 parables. The first one was a story about joy in finding a sheep that wandered off. The first one. The second one was then about joy in finding a misplaced coin. And the third parable that we heard today, this is the story that is sometimes called not the prodigal son, but the lost son, or sometimes even the lost sons, plural. Have you ever heard it called the lost son? 2 or 3 people, 4 people who have read a lot or gone to seminary, or lost sons. Yeah, not many of us, right? But the lost sons and that prodigal father is actually what this story is all about. It's about rejoicing in reconciliation. It's about the restoration of relationships. It's about mercy upon mercy upon mercy, even in the midst of being called a sucker. You see, it's not only about the reconciliation of that younger son, who now is clothed in a fine robe and has that ring, but it is also about the reconciliation of the father with the older son. You see, after all, remember, the older son comes back. He hears all the celebration. He asks the slave, "What is going on?" And then the older son refuses to go into the home. He stands outside, pouting, refusing to reconcile with his brother. He goes on a tangent about how he has done everything right, and he accuses his father about not being fair. The older son feels unjustly treated, and he feels that his envy, his pride, his anger, and his hatred are all justified because of the law and the customs of his time. In fact, that older brother is a lot like those religious authorities we heard at the beginning of the gospel. He was a lot like us. When we complain about the wasteful social safety nets that don't appear to help us. That older brother is a lot like us when we claim that ADA accessibility isn't important because it doesn't impact us. That older brother is a lot like us when we believe that we do more for this church than anyone else and more people need to step up and they need to do more. You see, but the problem with that kind of thinking is that when we are on the sidelines complaining and refusing to enter into that abundance that God has already provided us, we are the ones missing the party. We become too absorbed in what we do that we forget about everything that gathering in this place is all about. That it is about God's gifts, God's grace, God's mercy upon mercy upon mercy. And that is what is so radical about today's gospel reading. You see, that father would have had every right in that context to have screamed at the older son for his disrespect, to have taken back his inheritance, to have locked him up and led him away and said, "Be gone." But did the father do that to the older son? No. Yet again, just like with the younger son, the father responds in defense of joy. For when the lost is found, no matter if it is a sheep or a coin or a family member, there is joy. Joy is discovered when we focus on being in relationship instead of on being right. I'm going to say that again. Joy is discovered when we focus on being in relationship with one another instead of being right. Joy is found in sharing the abundance we have already been given by our God. Joy is God's vision for all of creation. So there it is. Today's parable. Prodigal son, prodigal father, the lost son, the lost sons, however you want to call it. In the midst of it, we are reminded that amid our faults, we have a God who is merciful. Merciful, merciful, almost absurdly merciful, almost stupidly merciful. A God that doesn't work like our world works, that doesn't focus on retribution, but focuses on restoration. We have a God who invites us into a magnificent banquet of mercy. Even if we have our temper tantrum outside, God says, come on in to this banquet of mercy. We have a God that encourages us then to reflect that mercy we have already received. And friends, that is why in this Lenten journey and beyond, I pray that we may strive to emulate that mercy, to be stupid in the ways that we are merciful, to be absurdly merciful in reflection of the ways that our God has been merciful to us and continues to show that mercy. May we pour out mercy upon mercy upon mercy. Amen.